Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. I am your instructor for today. In the previous lesson, we learnt about the causes of corruption and the conditions that make corruption flourish. Today, we'll be looking at the impacts of corruption. By the end of this lesson, learners should be able to assess the impact of corruption. In our previous lesson, we learnt about the causes of corruption from the stories told by Mr. Adade. Do you remember the causes of corruption? Today, we'll be discussing the impacts of corruption. Elom is at school today. We are very lucky her teacher, Mr. Aponsa, will be discussing the impacts of corruption. Mr. Aponsa will be narrating some stories and asking questions, after which the class will discuss the impacts of corruption. I want you to pay attention to the stories. Make your books and pens ready to answer the questions that Mr. Aponsa will be asking. Write down whether you agree with their discussions or not and your reasons. You can discuss your opinions with your peers, your tutor, or anyone interested.
How are we all doing today?
We are good, sir. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Today, we'll be learning about the impacts of corruption, but before that, who remembers the last topic we discussed?
Corruption and the causes of corruption.
Very good, Elon. Now, Sosu, do you remember how we defined corruption in our previous discussion?
Yes, I do. Corruption is the abuse of authority or trust for private benefit.
Very good. Now, Dede, do you remember anything about the causes of corruption as discussed in our last meeting?
Yes, sir. The causes of corruption can broadly be classified under 3 categories: the social causes, the economic causes, and the political causes. Examples of the social causes are promotion of ethnocentrism, social interaction, weak values in society, and human weakness.
That is excellent, Dede. Bravo. Now, any more additions?
An example of the economic causes are poor salaries. And examples of political causes are democracy, press judiciary and freedom, lack of accountability and transparency, weak institutions, and monopoly.
Very well said, Nee. You have all done well. Today, like I said, we are going to discuss the impacts of corruption on society. I want you to pay attention to the stories I will narrate to you so that you can answer the questions I will ask. Dr. Kwame Ayoks is the medical superintendent of health in a district hospital where Mauli Agbele is the district pharmacist and Grace Ajingo is the matron. The district hospital has 200 beds, a maternity wing, a theater, and a morgue for 30 bodies. An European NGO, in collaboration with the government of Ghana, supplies medicines to this district hospital. The NGO supplies medicines to the government for free. The 3, Dr. Ayoks, Agbele, and Ajingo, own and run a pharmacy some 200 meters from the gate of the district hospital. This pharmacy is mainly stocked with drugs and materials from the hospital. Awo, the hospital's procurement officer, is in charge of procuring drugs and supplies for the hospital from Ghana Central Medical Stores. Apart from her work at the hospital, Awo also keeps the accounts of the private pharmacy and is paid 15% of the profits of the pharmacy as a commission. She regularly monitors to ensure that the private pharmacy is well stocked with medicines from the hospital pharmacy. Consequently, the hospital pharmacy regularly lacks drugs and essential medical supplies. Dr. Ayoks usually prescribes medicines which he knows are not available in the hospital pharmacy. Patients are then forced to look for medicines elsewhere. Agbele and Ajengo are always on hand to direct these patients to the private pharmacy to buy drugs. Their scheme is discovered soon. The three are sent to court for their bad conduct. Fortunately, Dr. Ayox is the personal doctor of the judge. He pleads with the judge not to jail him and that he will render free healthcare service to the judge and his family. The three are not jailed, but rather made to pay fines. However, they are dismissed from working in the hospital. The European NGO is disappointed in the staff of the hospital and they withdraw their services to the government. They also call their sister company, who wants to invest in agriculture in the country, to cancel the deal because the people are corrupt. Their sister company cancels their contract. What will be the effects of the acts of the four people in the story on the governance or administration of the hospital and the society as a whole?
The lack of drugs at the hospital will lead to distortions and insufficiencies in the functions of the hospital. The hospital will not be able to render good healthcare services because of the lack of drugs.
Yes, that's a very good point. Corruption leads to distortions and inefficiencies. That's very true. Now, class, can you think of other points?
The inability of the hospital to render proper healthcare services will make people sick all the time. It will affect the health of human beings in the community and some may even die.
Very good, Halima. Corruption will have an economic effect on the country's human capital. The human capital will be small and a weak one. Now, Amwating, can you think of any other impact of their actions?
The European NGO stopped supporting the government and stopped the sister company from investing in the country. It can go ahead to influence more investors who want to come to the country, not to come due to the corrupt activities they experienced.
Yes, that's also a very good point. Corruption can deter foreign investors, and this will lead to a change in structure of foreign capital flow. Any other point?
The constant stocking of the private pharmacy with medicines from the hospital means that the hospital will not be making any sales of drugs for the government. The government will lose revenue through this.
Exactly. Very well said, Elon. The loss of revenue by the government will also influence the government's budget. There will not be enough funds to support a substantial budget. It's a good point. Another impact of corruption is revenue loss and its effect on government budget. According to the Auditor General in 2017, Ghana has lost a total of 892 million Ghana cedis due to financial weaknesses and irregularities. I have a question for the class. Assuming this same behavior is to happen in the agriculture, mining, textiles, and other industries, what will become of the country's GDP?
What is GDP?
GDP means gross domestic product, which is the monetary measure of the market value of all the final goods and services of a country per a particular time. If all these industries engage in acts like the three at the hospital, what will become of this monetary measure of final goods and services?
The GDP will be small.
Good. This means that corruption can also lead to low gross domestic product of a country. Now, let me ask you another question. Did the free healthcare deal offered by the doctor to the judge affect the judge's decision?
Yes, sir.
Good. Another impact of corruption is that the rule of law and justice system is compromised. Now, class, Was a political institution like the hospital effective by misappropriating the drugs? John Aban is a senior personnel officer in the livestock department of the Ministry of Fisheries. A circular has been recently received from the ministry's headquarters inviting the department to nominate 2 of its most deserving officers for a training to be held in the course of the month. It is understood that the training will be followed by a promotion for the officers. The head of department instructs John Aban to act on the circular. Peter Apak, an officer in the department, is Aban's childhood friend. Several officers in the department have complained about Apak's conduct and quality of work. Apak always comes to work late and never bothers to comb his hair or shave his beard. His clothes always look crumpled and badly in need of ironing. Not to mention that his office is known to be the most untidy in the department, with old files thrown all over the floor. He never delivers work assigned to him on time and spends most mornings reading the newspaper. He is rude and disrespectful to members of the public and fellow public officers. Whenever he hands in work, it is always full of mistakes. Many times the work has to be redone by the other officers in the department. The head of department has issued several warnings to Apak, but these have not caused him to change. Apak has remained in the same job group for a long time, and it seems unlikely that he will be promoted anytime soon. He approaches Aban and pleads to be considered for the training, as it might be the only chance for him to get a promotion. Aban agrees to do so on condition that Apak buys him several drinks and kebab over the weekend at their local pub. Apak agrees. Aban then endorses Apak for the training, leaving out other more deserving officers. That weekend, Apak fulfills his part of the bargain and buys Aban several bottles of drinks and kebab at the local bar. Since learning that Aban has recommended Apak for the training, other officers have developed a negative attitude in the department and are not putting their best into their work. The department's productivity is now at an all-time low. Now with this story, I want you to identify the effects of the act between Aban and Apak on the work of the livestock department. Will the actions of the two lead to a low gross domestic product, distortions and inefficiencies, and revenue loss?
Yes, they will. Apak himself is not effective and committed to the work. Aban's recommendation of Apak brought about a negative attitude among the officers in the department. Work will be inefficient and distorted. Revenue will be lost, and the services rendered will be low, which will affect the GDP.
Very good analysis. You have done well, Elon. From the two stories, we have identified 7 impacts of corruption. Who can mention them?
The impacts of corruption we discussed from the stories are low gross domestic product, change in structure of foreign capital flow, revenue loss and its effect on government budgets, distortions and inefficiencies, and human capital.
The other impacts of corruption are the rule of law and justice system is compromised, and it leads to weak political institution.
Very good, Araba and Musa. You have mentioned them all. However, the impacts of corruption can be classified into 3: social, economic, and political impacts of corruption. The points we have discussed fall under economic and political causes of corruption. The economic impacts of corruption are low gross domestic product, change in structure of foreign capital flow, revenue loss and its effect on government budget, distortions and inefficiencies, and human capital, and the political impacts of corruption are rule of law and justice system is compromised and weak political institution. I will tell you another story. I want you to identify the social impacts of corruption from this story. Do your best to identify how corruption affects our social life from the story. Now pay attention. There is a small community called Sergeant Ajete Street. There are no jobs after school. There are no social amenities. There are no jobs, hospitals, schools, good roads, electricity, and clean water. The officials of the district assembly embezzle funds meant to develop the community. They live lavishly in mansions and own a lot of cars. Some of them did not have all that wealth prior to becoming members of the assembly. As a result of no jobs and lack of social amenities, most of the educated youth have left the community to abroad to seek greener pastures. Those that have not traveled have taken to pickpocketing, robbery, and prostitution as a way of survival. Recently, Killer B, one of the most notorious guys in the community, robbed a mart with a knife. He was apprehended by the cops, arrested, and detained. While in the cell, he calls one of his gang who brings a suitcase to the chief inspector's office. They exchange handshakes and Killer B is released. The other smaller robbery gangs have seen that the police institution is weak and that they receive bribes. Due to that, they have also increased their activities, knowing that the more money they steal, the easier they can pay bribes to the police and go free. They live luxuriously, and many young ones have been influenced to engage in robbery and other vices just to live like the gangsters. Class, do you agree that misuse of taxpayers' monies by members of the assembly is what led to the lack of amenities in the community, thus poor educational and health infrastructure, as well as terrible roads?
Yes, sir.
Poor educational and health infrastructure, as well as terrible roads, are some of the social impacts of corruption. Do you agree that the embezzlement of funds by public officials will lead to an increase in poverty rate in the community?
Yes, sir. The cost of living will be high because of the lack of amenities, and this will make poverty rise.
Very good, Halima. Another impact of corruption is rising poverty. Now, class, from the story, what other impact did the embezzlement of funds by the assembly members bring about?
Embezzlements by the assembly members lead to a few job opportunities for the youth, and that, coupled with a lack of infrastructure, influence the youth to travel elsewhere for greener pastures.
The desire of the youth to travel elsewhere for greener pastures with the belief that there is nothing better in their current community is termed brain drain. Brain drain is also an impact of corruption. Very good point, Nee. Does anyone have anything to say about Killer B and the police?
The ability of Killer B to pay the police and go free influence the youth. This increased crime in the community, as the small gangs believed they could pay their way out if they were arrested for committing crimes. The frequency of crimes and the indulgence of the youth in committing crimes can also lead to serious moral problems in the community.
Very good, Dede. You have 2 points in your answer. First, corruption will lead to an increase in crime, and secondly, it will lead to moral problems. Those are very true points. Well done. Now, we have identified the social impacts of corruption. Who can tell us what they are?
The social impacts of corruption as discussed per this story are increase in crime, moral problems, poor educational and health infrastructure, terrible roads, and brain drain.
You have done well, class. I believe now we all know the impact of corruption from the stories we have discussed. I will be giving you 2 home assignments. In the first assignment, I will narrate a story to you, and you are required to answer the questions that follow. In the second assignment, you are to identify anti-corruption strategies that can be adapted to prevent corruption. Tessa Bosu is a founder and member of I Care For You, a non-governmental organization that seeks to promote patriotism in Ghana. The organization views the promotion of patriotism as key to the fight against corruption and the cure for insecurity in the country. The NGO has employed over 15 people and receives a lot of donor support to aid its work. Part of these funds has gone into the purchase of motor vehicles to facilitate visits and training workshops for people in the local communities. Yao Asamoah has just started a motor vehicle repair business called Why Not Auto Garage and sees the NGO as a good source of business. He approaches Tessa Bosu, the executive director of the NGO, with a proposal. He requests that Bosu push for the NGO vehicles to be serviced at his garage. In exchange, Asamoah will offer a percentage of any payments made to him with Bosu. Bosu readily agrees to the arrangement. Shortly after this, the NGO's finance committee decides to float a tender for the servicing of the NGO's motor vehicles. The committee sets certain criteria with regard to the tender for its internal vetting purposes. These criteria are not to be disclosed to the suppliers. As executive director of the NGO, Bosu sits on this committee. Immediately after the meeting, Bosu calls Asamoah and shares these confidential criteria with him. Why Not Auto Garage then puts in a bid based on these criteria. When the finance committee next meets to discuss the bids, Bosu fails to disclose that she has an interest in the tender and participates in the deliberations and decision of the committee. Why Not Auto Garage is awarded the tender for servicing the NGO's motor vehicles. The NGO thereafter sends vehicles to Why Not Auto Garage for repairs and servicing. The garage, however, lacks capacity to perform these tasks, with the result that most of the vehicles leave the garage more damaged than when they arrive. Further, the mechanics at the garage proceed to strip the vehicles of their parts and replace them with old ones. They then sell the new vehicle parts. The terrible state of the NGO's vehicles after servicing at Why Not Auto Garage prompts Kweku Holman, the NGO's administrator, to complain to Bosu about the service rendered by the garage. Bosu assures him that she will follow up on the matter. She, however, does nothing about it. At the end of the month, Yao Asamoah demands payment. The amount quoted by the garage as costs for repairs and servicing is far higher than what it had tendered for. The garage cites inflation and other factors as its reasons for inflating the cost. Holman protests at this and advises Bosu not to approve payment as the vehicles are not only in a worse state than when they were taken for servicing, but that the amount demanded by Why Not Auto Garage is not the one that was agreed upon and therefore cannot be justified. Bosu ignores Holman's advice and approves payment. Why Not Auto Garage is soon paid. Thereafter, Bosu receives the agreed percentage of the payment as her reward. Questions. 1. Identify the economic effects of Bosu's action on the organization. 2. Suggest the relationship that is likely to ensue between Bosu and Holman after the incident. 3. Can you relate any of these activities to what happens in your community?
Hello everyone. I hope you all benefited from Elam's class and the discussions they had. Now let's have a recap of all the points they raised. From the story and the discussions, the impacts of corruption can be classified under social, economic, and political causes. The economic impacts of corruption are low gross domestic product, change in structure of foreign capital flow, revenue loss and its effect on government budget, distortions and inefficiencies, and human capital. The political impacts of corruption are rule of law and justice system is compromised and it leads to weak political institutions. The social impacts of corruption, as discussed per this story, are increase in crime, moral problems, poor educational and health infrastructure, terrible roads, and brain drain. That is the end for today. Hope we meet again. Next time, I'll be discussing anti-corruption strategies.